Click. This is a public and recorded meeting of the Kubernetes community. Today is February 11th, 2016, and these videos will be posted on the Kubernetes YouTube channel, as will the notes be posted on the kubernetes.io blog. So let's jump in with our demo. This is a tool set that came through, and we had a little bit of internal discussion going, wow, this is super nifty, we want to see more. So that's how we came to invite Pangaea to give us a demo and thought you guys might be interested in it. So please join me in welcoming, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, so I'm Kanai, and Shahid's also here as well. I'll introduce the project to you a little bit, and then we'll do a quick demo. So I'm just going to share my screen with all of you. Am I online? Okay.
You are.
Perfect. So, okay. So the Pangaea is titled Point and Shoot Kubernetes. The idea is to just get Kubernetes to configure a bunch of things and have Kubernetes running wherever you want it. This kind of, I'll just go into the motivation a little bit. We're working on a product called Hustler.io, which I guess you guys can check out. The idea is to have microservices as packages to the runtime of Kubernetes, which is sort of similar to what I think Base is also doing with Helm. The underlying system that we needed to make this a reality was to have Kubernetes deployed everywhere, right? So Kubernetes should not depend on what infrastructure that you're using, especially on local development machines, because I would like to test my entire microservice application as a whole and not just images one by one. So out of this effort emerged this sort of collection of scripts, really, which is what we call Pangaea. And the idea is that it should be the easiest way to get Kubernetes running for application developers, not for anybody who's working on Kubernetes, but for final application developers. So application developers will expect things to have easy ways to configure things between development and production. They will expect to have things like file mounts, and they will certainly expect the entire application to behave in the same way on local machines and on different infrastructure machines. So to be specific, in development mode, when I'm running Kubernetes on my local machine, I like tight feedback loops. I want files to be mounted so that if I change files, I want to see the effect of that immediately, maybe on just a pod reload at most. I don't want to create new images for doing that. And in production mode, I would expect my Kubernetes setup to sort of have the security certificates installed so that my kubectl from local is safe. I expect things like disk mounting, log rotation, which is a big pain for application developers with all of this Docker Kubernetes stuff. The whole thing, log rotation, just never gets figured out, I think. And then logging and monitoring, of course. Currently, the setup is with Elasticsearch and Kibana, but it's easy to change. The demo that Shahid will take you over is going to be creating a simple Nginx container that serves static HTML, I think as usual with every single demo. And the idea will be to make some live modifications in development mode, use Vagrant for that, and then build that image and deploy that to GCE as well. What the steps that we are going over are available in the workflow docs on the GitHub repo as well. So that can be the reference. I'd let Shahid take over.
Hi guys, I'm Shahid. So yeah, I'll just directly jump into the demo. So I'm just sharing the screen right now. Is it visible? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, what I'm going to be demoing is we'll just build a sample application in which we'll have an Nginx container serving some static HTML file. So how we use Pangaea is, okay, by the way, all of these steps are well explained in the workflow docs. And so I'll just start off by creating a demo project. Okay. So demo. So I'll just go into that. I'll do a git init, just committing a empty file for the initial commit. Yeah, then we just do that. Sorry. Yeah, so now what we do is we add a remote for Pangaea we had a remote for Pangaea, and we didn't fetch Pangaea from GitHub. Yeah, now what we'll do is we'll just do a squash merge just to avoid all the all the history that Pangaea had, and we'll do a quick commit added Pangaea. Okay, so that's fairly how it is. All we have to do now is to bring up a Vagrant setup is to set provider equal to Vagrant in the .pangea configuration file. Then we can just execute Pangea Vagrant cube setup.sh. What the script does is that it downloads a CoreOS image and set up a VirtualBox machine with that, and install Kubernetes binaries into it, and start up a single node Kubernetes cluster. So it's going to take some time because of the images and all involved in the download. So I'm just going to skip into a folder which I already set up. Yeah, so in order to start the VirtualBox machine, all we have to do is Pangea bin vagrant up. So this will just bring up the machine. So everything is running locally. One more important feature that we have implemented here is that in order to help developers working locally, we'll mount our entire directory into the VirtualBox machine so that we can directly avoid the entire Docker build process. So it's already running. So I've already added a Nginx app here. I'll just show you that. Nginx. It just has a Docker file. I'll just cat it out so that we can see. So it just says from Nginx, copy the HTML directory into the current directory. And we have, so one more thing we have implemented is that since we can have different configuration for Kubernetes spec files, rc.yaml files, we have made a templating. We use Jinja for templating, so that we can use different configuration for production as well as in development. So we are using a mount path so that the working HTML directory is directly served from the host itself. And how we deploy it is, so I have set up all the files here. So let's show that in once more. So what we are doing is, so we have made another tool called kubet to template the rc.yaml files. These configurations are written in a file called kube template, which says which files has to be templated. So it says rc.yaml has to be templated, and the environment is development. Now we have an rc.yaml file generated, app nginx rc.yaml. So we'll be using this file to start the replication controller, and this is the service.yaml file. So we'll just see what are the things that are already running, kubectl codes. Before that, just to make sure that we are in the correct kubectl environment, we have a small script which is Pangea vagrant Pangea bin kubectl setup. We just make sure that the current context is used. Now we'll do kubectl get codes, which already shows that Nginx is running. So I'll just delete it, delete rc nginx. Yeah, so now we'll just create that rc, create and rc.yaml. So now we can see that the Nginx container is running, Nginx pod is running. So the way we set it up is to have the IP starting with 172.17.6 series. So the pod is exposed at 3084. So if we just curl it, we can see the contents of the HTML file. So 1 second. So that's how yeah, so we can just see the contents of HTML file. We can go to a browser and just show that. Yeah, so this is directly served by the Kubernetes pod. Now the main feature here is that since the folder is mounted, I can directly go and edit the index.html file, and those changes immediately appear in the served file. So I just delete this line. So I can just go and refresh. Sorry. Yeah, I just. Yeah, I'm refreshing the wrong screen.
You're on GC then, right?
Oh, sorry, I'm on the
wrong folder.
Okay, I was working on the wrong folder. Sorry.
Go back to the
Yeah, so this is the file. I have nginx HTML index.html. I'll just delete this line, and we can see that it has been changed.
So that's the local.
So that's the local setup. Rapid local development is possible by mounting files. Now the same interface can be used to deploy it to GCE also. All we need to do is set provider equal to GCE, as well as giving your GCE project ID, instance name, and there are two more preliminary steps involved in which create a disk, persistent disk, and an external static IP address. These are just additional features so that we can bring down the VM, destroy the VM, and create it again without any change in your underlying disk or the external IP address that you had. We have one more, right now we have one more provider, Azure also. We have made a provider for Azure. So GCE is also fairly simple. Pangaea GCE up.sh. Init, we do it in the initial setup because we need to set up the SSL certificates and send it over to the VM. So it's going to take some time because it is going to create the virtual machine and all. In the meanwhile, do we have some questions? Yeah, I'll hand over to Tanmay.
Anybody have questions for the
So
panel?
I think can you share your screen again, Shahid, so we can see the GC setup happening. It's going to take a while, but in the meantime, if you have any questions on how something is happening, I think it's pretty straightforward for everybody. But in case please do ask us.
Okay, so any questions?
Is there a homepage or a URL that you can give us to link to where this project is?
Yes, the project is right now hosted in our. It's in the repository. I'll just share that to you.
Yeah, this is Rob Hirschfeld. Somebody else can go if they want. So I mean, you're building a Kubernetes infrastructure so that to give a developer basically a dedicated Kubernetes cluster for their work. Is that? I mean, that's I'm going all the way back to boiling up the goal.
Yeah. Yes.
And why not just have them use an existing cluster? Is there an advantage to them having their own cluster versus being part of another cluster?
So I think the main thing is that for developers,
Are you muted?
yeah, I am.
You are muted, but we're hearing you through.
Then yeah, just I think there are multiple computers here. Am I echoing again? Hello.
No, we hear you.
All right, thank you. Right. So I think what we've noticed is when we were writing applications and we were setting it up with Kubernetes and multiple people were collaborating and whatnot, every developer sort of needs his own setup, right? And in this microservices thing that you have, where some guy's written the database kind of microservice, or somebody else has some other microservice, and there are 3 or 4 developers, and everybody's working on the same thing. You need to have a Git project that sort of contains the controller files, the Kubernetes controller files that have references to all the microservices. I need to run them locally so that I can iterate on them as I want. And then once I have the whole setup running locally, I would like to push it to staging, which can be a Kubernetes cluster, and then eventually push it to production. So in this kind of a workflow, I'm not sure I understand how we could have done this without having a local Kubernetes setup.
Okay, it's a good question. I mean, we've used Compose in the past for something like that, and that makes what you're doing makes sense if that's the idea. I'm just trying to get a feel for what the use case. I was assuming you would use a namespace to isolate multiple developers.
So I think also what happens is that so we work on multiple, say, projects simultaneously. So by multiple projects, I mean multiple, say, client projects simultaneously. So in which case, having different completely isolated Kubernetes setups because they might have different configurations seemed like a cleaner way to approach the whole thing. Another important thing was that I think that's the reason why with that. The thing with Docker Compose that you mentioned is that it's important to have the Sky DNS setup as well, right? So the default setup of Kubernetes that we do with Pangaea has Sky DNS and stuff working as well. So that means that whatever sort of names I assign to the services and however the services communicate to each other, all of that can be committed to the Git repo for the particular project, right? And then that doesn't need to change as it goes into staging and production.
Okay.
So I think the GC node is up. Yeah, so GC node is up. Just I moved into production from environment into template file and generated the RC file again. So I just do kubectl create -, and similarly service.yaml. This might be an older image which we have pushed earlier. We'll see. Okay, it's not up yet. Yeah, but it's still loading. Yeah.
Another important thing here is that when I as a developer am deploying onto Google Cloud or whatever, I want things like load balancers to be automatically created with the same IP and whatnot. So there's a little bit of scripting that we've done where we've just included all of these things that need to be done by developers all the time, like creating the load balancer as well, opening up the firewall ports because you waste time in creating the load balancer and then you forget, oh my God, the firewall port isn't open and whatnot. And the same thing, doing that across Azure as well. So a few little sort of nifty commands just baked into the whole thing as well. I think I guess this IP will eventually come up. But yeah.
Thank you. That's
so there are a few questions that we sort of had for the community. One of the things that we've just recently wanted to start exploring is, I'm just trying to share my screen again. Can you unshare? Share? Can you shut your share screen? You'll have to put your share screen. Okay, cool. Let me try this again. So this project is just about a few maybe a few weeks old, a few weeks worth of effort, maybe about 2 months old, and we have to now start doing the multi-node setup as well with CoreOS and whatnot. One of the problems that we faced with CoreOS was VirtualBox does not support CoreOS disk mounting, so we had to use NFS, and that does become slow on local development machines. That is one of the challenges that we've encountered with, I think that's more of a CoreOS VirtualBox problem. Another problem is that on the single node setup, the average CPU consumption seems to be 20% all the time, and it's various agents are consuming it. We're not sure, again, if this is normal or expected behavior, or this is just because we're putting everything on a single node, and ideally the setup is supposed to be maybe 2 or 3 nodes at least. So those are the sort of things we're grappling with. If anybody has any insight into whether we should be worried about it at all, it would be nice for us to know.
Awesome. How can people get you feedback? Through the GitHub repository that was dropped in chat? Is that the best way?
I'm sorry, I missed that question. My net is a little wonky.
How can people get you feedback and answers to this? Because we need to move
Awesome.
on.
Yeah, on the repository. Yeah, that would be the best way to do this.
Perfect. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you guys for coming and demoing this morning.
Absolutely.
If there are more questions, I'm sure that people can reach out through contacts on GitHub.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So up next, up next we have no use case today, so that works out well because we ran a little long on our demo. But we have SIG reports. So cluster op kicked off last week. So
I have no report. I got things set up and I need to schedule a time.
awesome. So you will be pushing forward with what time and people can connect on the cluster ops mailing list. Is that the best place? Or
There is, and I'll send out an announcing email. And what I'm trying to do first is collect efforts and sort of do an inventory. So if you're interested, you're not committing to a lifelong ball and chain with cluster ops. I'm just trying to find people who have interest. And then also, if you're aware of cluster ops efforts, I'm trying to build an inventory up so we can make sure we represent people.
and I've been pointing monitoring people your way, monitoring
Awesome.
and alerting. Is that fits within your charter? Yes.
I think so. Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so next up is a hello world from SIG AWS.
Yes, indeed. I don't know if Mackenzie's here, but Mackenzie and I are kicking off a SIG AWS for people that want to discuss the special interest of Amazon Web Services and deploying Kubernetes on Amazon Web Services and adding support for all the various pieces or equivalents to GCE services on AWS. And that will be SIG AWS. There's a Slack channel that's already seen some activity, and we have a mailing list that has not yet seen any activity, but we'll shortly be getting, I think I have 4 emails that I need to post to that for discussion. And we'll be setting up a meeting time and doing that sort of stuff, and hope to see everyone there.
Fantastic. I also saw some, I've been seeing more artifacts that say Azure. So at some point we will have to do a SIG Azure as well. So fun stuff ahead. All right. So I promised a bunch of introductions of people from the Google team and who are focused on a lot of the things that you as the community ask about. And so I'm going to introduce David McMahon first, who is working on release automation here, which is slightly different from some of the questions that have been coming up about release shepherding. So I'll let him explain where his charter fits with all of this. So this is David, sitting just across from me and slightly within camera.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Hi, I'm David McMahon. I was recruited on the team to help out with release automation. I started on the team not about a year, at the beginning of the year, very recently. I've helped previous groups here at Google to automate their release processes, and that's what I want to do here as well. The release process right now is heavily documented, but not so much automated. What we really want to see is at a high level, I'm not going to go deep diving here, I haven't developed a whole lot of this yet, but at a high level, the kind of things that I want to do is have a better clean separation between release and build. Right now it's a little munged at the moment. Generally make it more software driven versus documented, because documentation can be interpreted and modified on the fly. We don't like releases to be interpreted and modified on the fly. This is especially true when multiple people are actually doing the releases. You can have different inconsistent releases at that point. So the best way to do releases, obviously, is to take the human element as much out of the equation as possible. So policy enforcement process, everything goes through software. It's basically idiot-proof, re-entrant, push a button and repeatedly until you get your release out, handling all the necessary exceptions. So I haven't actually checked anything in yet, but you'll be seeing things coming through because I want, this is going to be highly transparent internally here at Google, as well as obviously outside to the community. So you'll see exactly how releases are done through software versus doc, again, which can be heavily interpreted. So one of the other things that was asked was, and Sarah pointed this out as well, what is it that I'm doing versus some of the things that concerns that were raised in terms of shepherding. The actual shepherding and controlling of the releases, I really want in the hands of the stakeholders. That's the principals, the leads on the team internally and externally, as well as TPMs and others, folks who kind of know the product very well. But what I want to do is provide them with the tools that make it easy to kind of dial up or switch, turn things on and off without having to understand the minutia of the release process itself. So that's the kind of what I do. Yeah, I think that's about it. So if anybody has any questions, fire away.
Do you have a target for which release or is it going to come in over phases?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of working on components of it. I need to put it all together, and there's something that's anything a basic framework out. It's certainly not going to be for 1 or 2.
Okay.
Any other questions? Rob, I'm going to mute you again.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody else have questions?
So I think TJ Gultman's been giving sort of the release 1.2 status updates on the mailing list thus far. Is this who I'm looking to for release updates going forward?
TJ, I think you're on the call, right?
Yes, I am here if you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, I will still continue to sort of hopefully drive and push the project on the whole towards dates and towards releases. And what Dave is working on is much more of the technical infrastructure and background for how code is actually built, packaged, released, etc. So that's sort of the difference between our roles. That said, obviously, we work very closely and all have the same goals.
Cool. Sounds good. I would love to see you at the next SIG testing meeting.
You just got me invited to SIG testing. The special interest group testing to make sure that all of the festival things are doing as well. Okay, any other questions, or shall we move on to the next introduction? All right, let's do the next introduction. So next up is Documentations in Kubernetes website redesign proposal, and an introduction more specifically of John Mulhausen, who has joined the team here in Google and is working on cleaning up, making easier and more transparent the docs and websites and such, so that we can have, I'll let him go on at great length because he does it so very well. John.
Hi. So I just joined the team on January 4th. And right now I'm working with a creative agency called United Creations, who are great on a complete redesign and build up of the website. So what we're trying to do as far as the documentation workflow is get out of the business of having a lot of munging scripts generate content. What we're aiming to do is do that more with, do the things that munging scripts were doing with native Jekyll functionality. And what that'll mean is we can keep doc editing very light and staging very light. So in other words, like, we can get pretty close to WYSIWYG. So my goal is, for those who are familiar with GitHub Pages technology, is that you should be able to fork our site, and it'll have the docs and the site and all of the assets for the site in that fork. And then if you were to either download that and run Jekyll serve on it, it would run and you would see the documentation. Or if you were to change the fork's name on your repository name to username.github.io, it would stage at that URL up in the cloud and you would see it. And this enables you to sort of make changes like as soon as you hit save on something, either up on github.com or on your machine, you'll be able to see the results of those changes right away. And no scripting necessary. You don't have to install Go. And it basically just makes it possible for everybody to participate in a very lightweight way. If you wanted to do all your doc editing up on github.com, you wouldn't even have to download Jekyll, download any software at all. It's just as simple as hitting some buttons on a website. And yeah, I'm trying to get us there. The new website also looks really nice. It's a little more gray. We're also trying to work towards some exciting things and announcements at KubeCon that I'm working with Sarah on. So yeah, I mean, that's it for me, really. I guess if anyone's worried about quality, which the munging scripts we're kind of enforcing through automatic means, we are going to have pre-submit checks that run on your pull requests still. That's going to be where the scripting happens. But as far as authoring, I want that to be really light. I think everybody should be able to fork the site and just make some edits and send it to it. It's just Markdown after all. So it should be as easy as editing a text file from now on when we're done. So that's me.
Anybody have questions for John? Wow, I expected more questions. Either that or everyone is on mute, which is also possible.
Well, I was on mute, Sarah. This is Diane. Is there an opportunity to, I was speaking to myself, opportunity to get a preview of what the site will look like, maybe in the next week's meeting?
Yeah, why don't we do that next week?
Okay.
It's on GitHub now, but it's pretty rough. I don't want to have too many eyes on it. I think I'll scare people.
But I'll give you the secret preview. The Kubernetes logo is no longer going to say Kubernetes by Google.
Ooh.
Ooh, big steps forward. Okay, baby steps forward, but we're working on it. Yeah, we will put you on the agenda for next week, John, and we can do a show and tell of the site mock-up.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, I will jump along the agenda to the 1.2 release watch and 1.3 planning, which are both TJ's items. So I think just a super quick update on 1.2 is all we have at the moment, but I will go ahead and hand this over to TJ.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I want to talk mainly about 1.3, but it's worth checking in on 1.2 as well. So 1.2, the big news-ish was feature complete as of a day or two ago. We are 100% done with every feature. There are definitely some features that are in there but need to be moved from beta to V1 API that have a few tests that need to be added, have known bugs. And so those are all things that we will clean up and make sure those features are ready to go for 1.2. But it is sort of a line in the sand of, hey, from this point onwards, we don't want to accept any major features or refactors as we sort of drive to stabilizing the code, fixing and cleaning things up for 1.2. There's also always the long tail of work around release. Like I said, test and bugs. Documentation has required significant effort to get updated in previous milestones, and it'll get better each time. And so that's sort of where we are for 1.2.
Can I interrupt you to also mention the testy flake surge? No, testing flake surge. So the surge at this point is over, but the goal is not to do these surges anytime regularly. The idea has been always to do this once to then maintain it. So as one of the changes in the last few weeks, at least internally at Google, we are making basically a flaky test. It's your first priority. It's a P0. If something is blocking the submit queue, blocking the merge queue, then that is more important than features as a generic principle of engineering here. And we want to continue to make the testing infrastructure and the tests better and more robust so that we spend less and less time ahead of any release doing testing. If you want to, and then the last pitch in here is if you want to get your pull requests through faster, come help fix tests, because we get to say that too. But our flaky tests are down by 75% at this point, and we are continuing to push on that. So that was just an update on the test surge and the path to 1.2. So TJ, if you want to jump onto 1.3, or if people have questions about 1.2 maybe first. Doesn't sound like questions unless people are on mute again.
Yeah, and so I'll just comment that the milestones that we have for in GitHub for v1.2 and v1.2 candidate, those are actual milestone tags in GitHub. Those had been essentially left for dead and bit rotted during 1.2. But there's been a decent amount of work to sort of triage what's in there in the last week or so. And so those milestones are now much closer to representing the work we think we have left for 1.2. And so as you find, more serious bugs that you think need fixed, we'll work to get them into those milestones, drive those down to 0, and then release 1.2.
This is Aaron Krickenberger. I was on mute. Just to put some numbers to that, I think 2 weeks ago when I started asking about the state of that milestone, the issue count was ballpark 150, 160, and we were at about 66% issues open total. 66% of the issues in total were still open, and we're now down to 58% of them are open, but the total issue count has doubled over the past 2 weeks. So it does seem like the full scope of work has been more accurately represented, but if I'm looking for a steady downward burn, it's a little concerning given the release plans for, we're supposed to close the remaining 66%, I think, in the next 2 weeks. Is that the timeline?
Yeah, so the original proposal plan was to close as much as possible in the next 2 weeks, week and a half, then to do the branch, and then to sort of finish the final trail of bugs in the branched 1.2 and release. And so that would be 3.5 weeks away. I do agree that looks relatively aggressive given where we are today. I don't think anyone wants to ship a 1.2 that's buggy or not complete. So there's nothing magical about the original proposal release date. It's just kind of our guide rails to look at things.
Okay, guide rails to look at things. So does that mean that if the 1.2 milestone is not completely burned down within 2 weeks, we're still going to be comfortable shipping, or what's the plan there?
No, I think it would be the opposite. If there are still bugs in the 1.2 milestone, and they are serious enough that we know they do need to be in there, they're not the kind of things that we feel comfortable shipping with and moving to 1.3. Well, I think we will delay until we fix those things. As you say, with the numbers, we're sort of just getting the first accurate count of things to do this week. And it's software, so it's hard to predict how quick that burn down rate will end up being.
Okay.
Is that helpful? I feel like that's a non-answer, but that's at least the way I have thought about it, and in talking to people, so others have sort of the same thoughts.
Yeah, to be honest, I do think a lot of us are heads down and working really hard on getting 1.2 out the door. So if truly all of the data is in there at last, then we're going to get our first real week of what it looks like when the community is focused on the 1.2 release. And I look forward to seeing what that velocity looks like.
Totally. Yeah. And some feedback, I think, from 1.1 is we probably branched too early. And then as we got into the next milestone, there was an awful lot of cherry picking and ugly merging. And so I don't think, even though we're hoping to branch in a week and a half, like I wouldn't branch if we know that there's just all of these issues we're going to have to put in 2 branches at that point.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. So thoughts on 1.2? Sort of to talk about 1.3, because obviously that's coming next. I don't have grandiose plans or any firm ideas here, but I've been looking back at sort of what we did for 1.1 and 1.2 and how it worked, and digging into a lot of PRs and how that went. And sort of my first observation was, if I look back, we were doing a lot of the planning for 1.2 during the end of the 1.1 milestone, sort of at this point. And as you said, there seems to be a lot of people really heads down on finishing up the milestone. So my first proposal is to sort of punt on 1.3 planning until 1.2 is fully released. And I'd love to hear feedback on that if people think that's a problem. I don't think that we, in the absence of a plan, lack work to do. There's always tons of bugs to fix and tests to work on. But that's sort of my first observation and proposal, if anyone has any feedback.
So we sent out a survey for the backlog features for 1.2. Do you have any plans to do that for 1.3? Like, we could start that process already, I think, for what big features people are looking for. And we have the list of things that we are trying desperately to get into 1.2, and assuming those things get in, then I think it should be at least clear what is still left out there that could go to 1.3.
I think that probably leads into his next point just perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Sarah and I were talking just face to face the other day about how we do this 1.3 thing and then improve from 1.2. And yeah, like I think, like you say, Brian, like there are a whole bunch of features that everyone has off the top of their head that they can probably name that are probably very likely to be in 1.3. So we already have a start of an idea. I think where we've struggled for 1.2 is defining sort of things that absolutely must be in there versus things that we'd love to have, but maybe shouldn't block a release of a minor version. So what I was thinking is once 1.2 is out and we feel good about that release, we sort of have people go off for a week or two and sort of individually or within their companies or however they want to plan, think about probably 2 sets of things. One would be the sets of features that you think you'd like in 1.3 and that you can contribute to, that you or your teammates will be working on. And then I think there probably is another list, which is a set of features that's a wish list, things that you would love to see, but you don't think you'll be committing to work on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So to go, and the first thing is actually something I have been asking for. So the leads on of the different components spend a huge fraction of their time just reviewing proposals and pull requests from the community, not even working on features that we want into the release or into Kubernetes. So it would help us tremendously to understand what things other people are trying to get done and in what time frame. So 1.3 might be the time frame.
Sure.
But I know that some people have release deadlines that don't perfectly line up with releases. So if the release deadline is different than 1.3, either earlier or later, and you still need to get it into head, that would also be very useful for us to know, right? So
ideally, this will end up generating functionally a per contributor or a per contributor group backlog list of their own. These are the features we want. These are the timings we think on it. This is what we're committing to. And then there's sort of and we think this all needs to happen, but we need to figure out who's doing it. list that needs to be prioritized by Google and the community collectively. And I think that also leads to the next point. I may have seen a preview of this from in TJ's space as far as, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm imagining that after 1.3, we take some time, put some thought into that, bring those lists, and then maybe have a community meeting discussion specifically around those two sets of lists, the things that people will contribute to and the things that people want but maybe don't have time to contribute to. And then I think the last thing is, like you said, Brian, with the release and whether or not things can be in head or be in the release or before or after. We have chosen this sort of 3-month release cycle. And that was, some early feedback from the community between 1.0 and 1.1. There's nothing that keeps us mated to that if we think that that's not ideal. But it's definitely the case that this sort of imposing a feature complete date based on that milestone and imposing code slush is definitely not ideal for engineers. That seems to create a big rush of arbitrary cutoff dates. So I don't have the answer yet, but I'd like to improve that. I think there could be a world where we get much better at tests, we get much more rigor into the way we build Kubernetes, and we get to the point where we say head is mostly stable. And so a release is just 2 weeks away at any given point. We don't have to have these sort of cutoff dates. That might be pretty far in the future, but I think we'd probably like to get there. But I'm open to feedback and discussion.
Yeah, and that would be good to know whether people want that. And we have, internally, we have releases as often as every 2 weeks, even for extremely critical components. It does require a lot more extensive and rigorous testing than we are currently doing. And it also requires a different discipline for feature development, because for features which are not fully complete, fully operational, you have to be sure that they don't break anything at any point in time, either because the functionality can be added piecemeal or because they're flag gated and they're actually disabled at head until they are complete enough to not cause problems. So,
which also leads to an interesting point about more rigor around new features. So even as we have these new lists of what you, the community, will commit to doing, we want to make this as smooth a process of getting it in and discussing it in pull requests with things that look like very lightweight user-focused PRDs. Like what problem are you trying to solve from a user perspective? And then if the discussion starts to get longer than, hey, why don't you change this thing and then it looks awesome, or something, relatively lightweight within the PRD about the discussion about the PRD, then we need to look at having design review for the more complicated features, just so we can as a group come together and decide the right way to implement something on these features. So I think those are all things we want to work toward within 1.3. Now, not every feature or request is going to need, a full-blown design review. It may just need a looks good to me, but many of them we have seen in pull requests in the past, more in 1.1 I think than in 1.2, get mired in discussions because someone submits something a little bit more fully baked than, and other groups or the leads here would have done it very differently. And so we want to head those off by having the conversations earlier. So to that end, within 1.3, I would love to, as TJ described, get those lists from people, synthesize them, discuss them as a community, and then start moving toward a lightweight PRD process as well. Thoughts?
So this is Rob Hirschfeld. I'll throw on my camera. This is a thorny problem. I know from watching OpenStack for a long time that they've really struggled for this, and I think you're right to try and do something up front and make sure that that's actually an authoritative source. Because putting it back in after the fact is really tricky. One thing that and I don't have a good answer, but I wanted to throw some thoughts out there if that helps. Just that if you segment it, if you silo it too much to make the lists manageable, then you're going to end up with a lot of cross-project or cross-component dependencies. And if you don't do that, then people are going to get lost in what those priorities are. So, and I see you nodding.
We have to find a balance.
Yeah.
Every project has a different balance.
It does. I would suggest making sure that there's some cross-project way to just keep cross-project or cross-component. It's not even cross-project in mind for that. And at some point, you're going to have to get people in a room or in a meeting and just hash through these things.
Which actually leads to one other point I have, which is we are still trying to pull together a contributor summit. I have been dogging the VP level here for my budget. So as soon as I get budget, I will be able to make a couple of date proposals. My preference would be roughly the first week of April, but we shall see if we can make that happen.
Do you want to have a dedicated time to talk about process with this, or are you sort of working through it and you'll keep coming back to the community on it?
I think that's an open question. We're happy to work through it and keep coming back to the community. If that doesn't feel like enough conversation or enough engagement, I'm open to trying to adjust that. I think it goes a little bit faster if we try to come up with an idea, put out a straw man, and you guys go yes and or no but, preferably yes and.
I have a very concrete, might sound a little orthogonal suggestion on this, that the activity should be accompanied with some org chart. And the rationale is that the person speaking in the product, the PRDs and writing the PRDs, it'd be really helpful to know their relationship to individual contributors from that perspective. This is one of the things I argued for in OpenStack. And it became very hard because somebody would ask for a feature but not know which manager to talk to get developers to help with that feature. And so transparency on the relationship between the proposers for this and the people doing that work, I think would go a long way.
It's a really good idea, and it actually makes more concrete some of the work that I've been trying to figure out, which is how do we grow community members into leads of some stature for different components possibly, or different ideas, basically growing the next set of leaders as Google moves to be more a large company contributor as opposed to the large company contributor.
And on the path towards building leaders, we desperately, desperately, desperately need to grow the reviewer pool.
Yes.
Right? So as people develop expertise in parts of the code, and we do need to foster people building that expertise, we need to add them to the automatic PR assigner. We need to make sure that people know that they can be assigned for code reviews for that.
And what implications are with that.
Yes.
I would love to see a concrete action item out of this meeting to be a documented process on how one gets promoted into reviewer status. It's unclear to me what the process is to even get added to the Kubernetes org, which is a pain point for some of the SIGs who use team membership as a way to notify the rest of the SIG of issues of interest. The last time I tried this, I got a sort of, who on your team has contributed to a PR, and did they sort of know that it was hygienic and that sort of thing? I appreciate the motivation behind that there should be a process of vetting and whatnot, but it just needs to be documented and in the open so we can start to use this a little bit better.
Yep.
Yeah, before it could be documented, we need to figure out what the policy should be.
Right.
It has been somewhat informal, and
that's what you've run against.
There are some practical considerations. Yeah, we just haven't had time to think about it. We've just been so overloaded. I would just have to say, sort of qualitatively and somewhat quantitatively, if someone has had 100 PRs merged, that's a pretty good indication that they're pretty committed to the project and pretty familiar. And especially if they've worked in a specific area for most of that, then I have no trouble adding them to the org, for example, because then I can assign issues and PR reviews to them, right? So there's,
but just at that level, there's a difference between being in the org and being in the team that has enough privileges to assign LGTM labels. And
so that's a GitHub problem, right? So that we need to sort out. We've been discussing what to do about that. Basically, you have to have full write access to the Kubernetes repo in order to be able to just add the LGTM label.
But LGTM label to me is what it takes to be a reviewer. Like, I can be a member of the Kubernetes org.
That's absolutely untrue, right? Like, there are plenty of people who review PRs and can put LGTM on the label, and then they can add a lead on the project to add the label. And we can automate that, and we can do other things, or if we figure out how to control who can click the merge PR button, even if they have write access, and that's something we're looking at doing, then that would be easier. But we can automate the application of the label based on, like for testing, for example, we have a whitelist of people that's separate from GitHub, and then we have a bot that goes and does things based on what people in that whitelist post to PRs. So we could do something like that as well.
It is definitely
It sounded like a documentation issue.
It is documentation, it is process, and it is something that we are working on.
It's tooling as well.
Yes.
We're working around limitations of GitHub.
We are also working with GitHub to get around these limitations. So that's another thing. We have no minutes left. I was going to say you had a whole minute, but we have no minutes left and are about to lose our room. So I will see most of you next week, I hope. And we will continue this discussion and others. We can also continue this discussion on the mailing list or in Slack. So I will see you all there.